There was once a meadow at the edge of the world, where the late summer sun fell so warmly upon the grass that the flowers themselves seemed to lean into its light. The grass was a soft green that bent in slow waves with each breath of the warm wind, and the flowers were every flower that a young goddess might love. Pale narcissus and saffron crocus, deep blue iris and white anemone, all of them growing thick and easy beneath an open sky that had never, in all the years since the world was made, known any season but this one. For in those days there was no winter. There was no autumn either, and no spring as we have come to know it. There was only the long, warm light that the goddess Demeter, the lady of the harvest, had laid across the world like a blessing upon her own beloved child. And in that meadow, in that endless summer, walked her daughter Persephone, gathering flowers into the lap of her gown, her dark hair catching the gold of the sun, her small hands stained pink with the petals of the things she loved. She did not know yet what the world looked like when the warmth went out of it. She did not know yet that the warmth could go out of it at all. Far below the meadow, in a kingdom no living creature had ever wished to visit, there sat a god upon a throne of dark stone. His name was Hades, and he was the lord of the underworld, the keeper of the dead, the eldest brother of Zeus, who had drawn the shortest lot in the dividing of the cosmos, and so had inherited the lands beneath the world. He was not, as the songs would later make him, a monster or a tyrant. He was something stranger and lonelier than either of those things. He was a just God in a place where no one wished to be just to him. He kept his kingdom in good order. The rivers ran where they should run. The souls of the dead were attended to with care. The great hound at his gate kept watch as he had been told to keep watch. And Hades sat upon his throne and looked from time to time at a small window of pale light far above his head, through which he could glimpse the surface of the living world. He saw the sunlight he had not stood within for ages. He saw the colors he had not seen for so long that he had begun to forget the names of them. And one day, looking up through that window, he saw the goddess Persephone walking in her meadow, and his heart, which had been quiet for centuries, did something that surprised him. It moved. What happened next has been told in many ways, and none of the ways have ever quite been right. The earth opened. The black chariot of the underworld rose into the sunlit air of the meadow, drawn by 4 horses dark as starless night, and Hades came up out of his kingdom for the first time in an age. He took Persephone into the chariot. He did not ask her. He had not learned how to ask. He had been alone too long to remember that this was something one was meant to do, and his loneliness had curdled in that long silence into a hunger that did not know how to speak itself in any other language than the language of taking. Persephone cried out, and her mother, far across the world, heard the cry and dropped what she was holding, and the world began in that moment to come unstitched. The earth closed behind the chariot. The flowers in Persephone's lap fell to the meadow grass. The horses descended into the dark, and a goddess of summer was carried against her will and beyond her understanding into a country that no living being had ever returned from. The world above broke. Demeter, the lady of the harvest, walked the earth searching for her daughter, and her grief was so vast and so unanswerable that it became the first winter the world had ever known. The grain in the fields ceased to grow. The vines wilted upon their trellises. The fruit trees dropped their leaves and stood bare, their branches reaching up into a sky that had begun, for the first time, to hold a coldness it had not held before. Mortals began to die of hunger. The cities of men grew thin and silent, and still Demeter walked, calling her daughter's name into every cave and across every sea, asking every mortal she passed if they had seen a young goddess with dark hair and a lap full of flowers. None of them had, none of them could, and the gods upon Olympus looked down at the freezing world and understood that this could not be allowed to continue, that the cosmos itself was beginning to come apart at the seams of one mother's grief. Beneath the world, in the dim gray light of the throne room of Hades, Persephone sat upon a great carved chair of black stone that had been set beside the throne of the king. She did not look at him. For many days in the beginning, she had not looked at him. She had wept, and she had refused the food he set before her, and she had asked the silent shades of the dead who passed through the throne room on their way to whatever lay beyond it, when she might be permitted to go home. They had no answer for her. They had forgotten what home was. And so, slowly, in the way that even the most extraordinary grief begins to wear itself into a quieter shape, Persephone had begun to look around her. She had begun to walk the halls of the dark kingdom. She had begun to see what no living being had ever seen. There were rivers down there she had not known. The Styx ran black and slow through the great cavern, and beside it grew a strange pale grass that the dead souls liked to lie upon when they were weary. There was a flower in that grass, small and white and luminous, that grew nowhere in the upper world, and that had no name in any tongue that the living spoke. There were stones that glowed faintly from within, set into the walls of the long corridors, and she found, walking past them, that they grew brighter as she approached, as if her presence had reminded them of something they had nearly forgotten. There were quiet places, gardens of a kind, where the souls of those who had died gently sat in silver light and remembered the lives they had loved. And Persephone, who had been a goddess of meadows and of summer flowers, began to understand that the dark was not empty. It was only different. It had its own kind of beauty. It had only been waiting for someone with living eyes to see it. And Hades, the king of that dark kingdom, watched her walking through his halls, and he did not speak to her, because he did not know how to undo what he had done by his silence. He left her gifts upon the carved black chair, a bowl of those pale, luminous flowers from the riverbank, a small, carved cup of stone that fit her hand exactly, the folded wing of a moth that had drifted down from the surface and would have died otherwise. And Persephone, returning each day from her walking, looked at these small offerings, and she did not throw them down, and she did not weep over them. And after a long while she looked at the king himself, sitting alone upon his throne in the dim gray light, and she saw for the first time what he was. He was the loneliest being she had ever known. He had taken her because he did not know how to ask. And now he sat in the kingdom that he had taken her into, and he did not know how to ask for that either. She did not forgive him. She did not, in any simple way, come to love him. But she began slowly to speak to him. She told him about the meadow she had been taken from. He told her about the rivers of his kingdom. She asked him the names of the flowers that grew in the dark. He told her that they had never been named, that no one had ever been there to name them. And would she like to give them names herself? She did. She named the small white flower of the riverbank, a name that the dead would carry on their lips for thousands of years afterward. And the king of the underworld, who had not laughed since before the world was made, smiled in the dim light of his throne room, and Persephone, looking at him, felt the strangest thing she had ever felt, which was the slow, quiet realization that she was no longer afraid of him. She did not yet know what she was instead, but it was not fear. It was Hermes who came for her, in the end, the messenger of the gods sent down by Zeus to bring her home to her mother. The cosmos could not be allowed to die for grief. Demeter could not be allowed to walk the earth forever, weeping, while every mortal she had ever loved froze in their fields. Persephone was to return to the surface, to the meadow, to the warm summer that her mother had laid across the world. And she rose from her carved black chair, and she looked at the king of the underworld, and she understood that she would have to choose, in the moment of her leaving, who she would be when she returned to the world above. She had been a girl in a meadow. She was no longer that. She had been a captive in a kingdom of the dead. She was no longer that either. She did not yet know what she was, but she would perhaps know it by the time she reached the surface. Before she left, Hades offered her one last small thing. It was a pomegranate, dark red, heavy in his hands, the fruit of a tree that grew somewhere in the deep places of his kingdom, and that no living being had ever tasted. He did not tell her what it meant. He did not tell her that to eat the food of the dead is to belong in some part of yourself to the kingdom of the dead forever. Perhaps he did not know how to tell her. Perhaps he was not sure himself whether the offering was a trap or a gift. Persephone took the pomegranate. She looked at it for a long while in her hands, and then she opened it and she ate 6 of its small bright seeds, slowly, knowing as she ate them that she was making a choice that would change her, and not knowing yet what the change would be. She ate 6. She did not eat the 7th. She gave the rest of the fruit back to him, and she walked with Hermes out of the dark kingdom and up the long, pale path to the surface of the world. Demeter held her daughter on the meadow grass and wept, and the world began to bloom again around them. The grain stood up in the fields. The fruit returned to the trees. The mortals lit their hearth fires and gave thanks. But Persephone, in her mother's arms, was not quite the daughter Demeter had lost. She was older now, in some way that had nothing to do with time. And when she told her mother gently that she had eaten 6 seeds of the pomegranate, Demeter understood at once what it meant. For each seed her daughter had eaten, she would owe 1 month each year to the kingdom below, 6 months above, 6 months below, half the year a daughter of summer, half the year a queen of the dark. And the cosmos, which had been so close to coming apart entirely, knit itself back together upon this strange new pattern, and the seasons of the world were born. So it was that every year, when the warmth began to leave the air, and the leaves of the trees began to turn the colors of fire and wine, the mortals understood that the goddess was going back down to her other kingdom. The earth grew cold not from cruelty, but from a mother's quiet ache. And every spring, when the first crocus pushed up through the thawing ground, the world knew that she had returned, and the warmth came back into the soil because Demeter, the lady of the harvest, was holding her daughter once again. But what the mortals did not always understand, what only the poets sometimes guessed, was that Persephone was not unhappy in either of her two kingdoms. She had been taken into the dark, and in the dark she had become a queen. Not the queen they expected, not the queen she expected, but a queen entirely her own, of a world she had not chosen and learned slowly how to call her own. She had carried that meadow with her into the underworld. She had carried that underworld with her back into the meadow. And she was no longer only a daughter of summer, and she was no longer only a captive of the dark. She was both. She was someone neither of them had known how to make her be. And so, in the long memory of the Greek world, the story of Hades and Persephone passed from the songs of the harvest festivals into the deeper places of the human heart. It became, more than anything else, the story of becoming someone in a place you did not choose, of finding a strange beauty in the dark when no one had told you that the dark could be beautiful, of returning to the warm world a different self than the one who had left it, and of bringing something back from the depths that nothing in the bright meadow could ever quite have given you. And every autumn, when the leaves turn and the warmth begins to go, somewhere in the quiet of the world, a goddess is going home to a place she also calls home. And every spring, when the first green pushes through the dark earth, she is returning, carrying with her the seeds of a kingdom that taught her, in its own strange way, who she had always been.